it should be a pretty interesting group of people talking here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone, and then we're going to go right in. I'm going to ask that you save any questions for the end. We will have a question and answer session at the end. Also, I want to thank Pan TV for recording and airing our panel discussion series this year. And I want to thank the Social Justice Council for hosting this with us here at the First Unitarian Church of Chicago. And right down here at the end is Ralph Martire. He is the Executive Director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. He teaches a master's level class on education, finance, and fiscal policy for the University of Illinois and Roosevelt University. In February 2011, he was appointed to serve on the U.S. Department of Education, Equity, and Excellence Commission. He is a distinguished lecturer on public policy for Roosevelt University and has taught fiscal policy seminars for various universities and the International Fulbright Scholar Program. Ralph has received numerous awards for his work on education policy reform, including the 2007 Champion of Freedom Award, presented by the Rainbow Push Coalition to individuals whose professional work embodies Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s commitment to equal educational opportunities. Mr. Martire holds a BA in History from Indiana University and received his JD from the University of Michigan. Next to him is Bruno Behrend. He is the director of the Heartland Center for Transforming Education. He has a strong background in public policy, communications, as well as experience in the political arena. He co-authored Illinois Deserves Better, the ironclad case for an Illinois Constitutional Convention, which coincided with a campaign to pass a referendum calling for a constitutional convention. He has served as a policy director, strategist to a gubernatorial candidate, and hosted a radio show in the northern Chicago metropolitan area that showcased various authors and policy specialists. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, where he earned his degree in finance. He earned his JD from ITT Kent College of Law and is licensed to practice law in the state of Illinois. And both of them will be talking about taxation. On our right is everyone's going to be talking about the justice system. Right next to me is Delois Lacey. She's from the NAACP, Chicago Southside branch. She is a distinguished Toastmaster with Toastmasters International and a retired legal secretary. She serves as the chair of the Criminal Justice Committee of the NAACP Chicago Southside branch. In her role, she and her committee are working within the framework of the national NAACP guidelines towards achieving the mandate, educate over incarcerate. Delois has taught Bible church school lessons to the youth for 40 plus years in the greater Chicagoland area. Currently, she serves as an auxiliary president of the Senior Women's Missionary Union of the Christian Unity Baptist District Association in Chicago. Delois is passionate about encouraging the equity, inclusion, and diversity of people. Next to her is Tracy Siska. He received his Master's of Arts degree in Criminal Justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago and is currently a PhD student in the Criminology, Law, and Justice Department at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is from the Chicago Justice Project. He has been researching issues involved in the criminal justice system in Chicago and Cook County for 10 years. He has worked extensively with reporters, and through his research projects, he has uncovered misdeeds by local officials. He also created Crime and Punishment, the public affairs radio show that covers the criminal justice system in Illinois. And last but not least is Walter Bush, and this is Walter's second time being on one of our panels. And he is from the Renaissance Collaborative. Walter Bush IV is an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, urban planner, and community developer, focusing on economic development, and he has taken his creative energies and insights to focus on assisting communities and organizations with business development initiatives and workforce training. Currently, he is the Education and Employment Manager for the Renaissance Collaborative in Bronzeville, where he oversees all research and programming encompassing workforce development. He holds a master's degree in urban planning and policy from the University of Illinois at Chicago and a bachelor's degree in sociology from Lewis University. So our first question is going to be on taxation. And We're going to head to Ralph for the first one. What do you consider to be fair taxation?
It's not what I consider to be fair taxation. What's good fiscal policy? It's actually a very simple act. Fair taxation is progressive taxation in a capitalist economy. It's a very venerable principle. It actually goes all the way back to Adam Smith, the guy that invented capitalism and the wealth of nations in the 1750s. He theorized that under a capitalist economic society, economic growth would always disproportionately advantage top income earners, because that's how the system would work. Top income earners should have the greatest tax burden when tax burden is measured as a percentage of income. So to have fair taxation in an economy like our economy, you need progressive taxation. Now, the interesting thing about Adam Smith's theory is really borne out into reality if you look at the data. So over the last, let's say, 35 years, the vast majority of all economic growth in America has gone to the wealthiest 10%. Indeed, if you adjust for inflation, the bottom 60% of income earners in America from 1970 to 2007, so before the Great Recession started, we don't want to tarnish data with the Great Recession. Over that time sequence, they actually lost income. And the top 10% of income earners got 66% of all income growth in America. So it's been a significant trend in this country to see top income earners, in fact, gain the vast majority of growth in income over time, and hence to be fair when you tax. You focus your taxes on individuals who are paying out of their significantly growing wealth, rather than individuals that would be paying out of either their growing poverty or their flat incomes over time.
Right, Bruno?
Well, before you even start talking about fair taxes and what is fair, and let's make no mistake, fair is a value judgment. There's data, there's things that are efficient, there are things that are inefficient. Yeah, it's not, I can speak, it seems to go off and on. So, right. So I would say that fair is a function of values, and that is a function of what people do at the voting booth. What is a good tax system? That's another issue. I don't think you can begin to talk about taxation and fairness of taxation or efficiency of taxation before you start talking about spending. My theory is, and I think this is borne out by the data too, is that if you are spending money at the public level, you are taxing. You can borrow, but you're going to have to pay that debt. You can print, but that's going to have an impact. Set this down and see if the mics pick up. So from that standpoint, it's real simple. If you're spending, you're taxing. So you can't really separate spending and taxation in my view. Now, if a tax system is capped, if there's a limit on what the government can spend, then A, the citizens have to decide what they can spend under that cap or whether they want to raise that cap, as citizens should be able to do. So a lot of this has to do with a political issue of fairness. Can the people impact or change or do something about their taxes? I would go so far as to say that if you have controls on spending, if there is a limit of spending, then taxation is a function of will of the people at any given point in time, and they may wish to tax incomes. They may wish to tax incomes progressively. They may not. They may wish to change that, and they may wish to change it to tax consumption. And this is all a political decision that has to be made by the people every 2 years, every 4 years, at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, as far as what they want taxed. If the people decide that progressive taxation is what they want, then that's what they're going to get. In closing, I would say that fairness is therefore a function of the debate and what the people decide. Inside government having limits on it. If you have no limits on it, you're just going to end up with what we're seeing in Europe, which is a collapse of the currency system based on governments not having any limits on them and printing, basically selling bonds that they knew they weren't going to be able to pay. Here you can see what's happening in California. Regards to whether or not progressive taxation is fair, I would just close with this. That's a decision for the people, but if you look at states like California, which are very, very reliant on exceptionally high progressive taxation, they have a boom and bust economy where when the economy is doing well and there's a lot of rich people earning a lot of money, they have revenues pouring in, which they spend the way they want. They make promises out into the future that they can't keep. And then the moment the economy turns south, you have a complete collapse in revenues, which is what we've also seen in the United States with a not as progressive relative to what California does, but a very, very progressive system that has, over 5 or 6 different versions of tax reform, removed 47% of the people from paying any income taxes while relying more and more on the wealthy to fund everything. Whether or not the wealthy have earned more money as the economy has done better, as Ralph said, is a function of how well the economy is doing, but we've also seen over time that the wealthy are paying a greater share of the federal income tax since the 1980s as well. So I would say that fairness is a value judgment, which I'd be more than happy to debate or discuss depending on what people think those values are, but we really have to have a system that works, and the best system would be one where government is limited in its spending.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, value judgments are all well and good, but I don't go to the gardener to get my car fixed. Fiscal policy has certain principles, just like other aspects of economics and finance do. And the bottom line is fair taxation in a capitalist economy is progressive taxation. It's one of the 4 fundamental principles of sound tax policy. In fact, the 4 principles are that you have a tax system that's fair, responsive, stable, and efficient. And fairness is, in fact, defined as progressive. So that's number 1. It's not a values judgment. I wouldn't go to a baker to tell me how to design the fiscal system. I would go to an economist that has some experience in it. And the bottom line is it's one of the 4 principles. It always has been. That's number 1. Number 2. Our income tax was reestablished in 1913. Only 4% of the population paid it. This was the era of the robber barons, and it was an incredibly highly progressive tax system. And in fact, individuals on both sides of the political aisle have strongly supported progressive taxation over the years. It's only recently that low and middle income families began to become relied on in our tax system as a consequence of World War II. But for that war, we would not have been taxing low and middle income families. It just wouldn't have been part of our tax system, wasn't part of the initial design. 3 of the presidents who made some of the strongest statements about the importance of progressivity in a tax system are Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George W. Bush. In fact, George W. Bush, when he put in his quote-unquote tax reform proposal, which cut taxes pretty much for everyone, he made it very clear that the percentage cut for low and middle income families in his proposal, these are his exact words, in his budget proposal, was greater than it was for more affluent people, with the design being affluent folks would end up paying more of the taxes after George W. Bush's proposal went in. I mean, this is just such a fundamental principle of fair taxation that shouldn't be a question open for debate. Now, if you want to look at the spending side of the ledger, and you can certainly do that, at the federal level, you can see that our revenues have not kept up with our expenditures over time, and that there's been a significant sort of growing apart and expansion of the deficit since 2001. So let me give a little history on that, and on tax rates, and on the economy, to try to put a couple of these larger concepts in context for you. From the end of World War II until 1970, tax rates on the wealthy were incredibly high. They varied, the highest tax rate at the federal level varied from 71 to 90%. It's a very high marginal rate. Now, the marginal rate is almost irrelevant because you look at the effective rate after deductions and stuff. But the marginal rate was quite high, number 1. Number 2, average economic growth per year in America, growth in the GDP, in real terms, was 3.4%. Excuse me, 3.8% over that whole time series, 3.8%. Number 3, the income distribution went like this. The bottom 90% of America got 66% of all income growth, and the top 10% got 34%. Then came Reagan and the advent of supply-side economics and the concept that, gee, Reducing taxes, the supply side economics fundamental principle, reducing taxes on the wealthy is a great way to stimulate the economy. Because these are the individuals that will invest in creating jobs and research and development and all that other stuff. They will drive our national economy. So if we cut taxes on the wealthy, that will benefit everyone. It will trickle down into growing and expanding incomes for everyone in America. In fact, the economy will grow at such a better rate than previously that it will be, at worst, from a federal revenue standpoint, income neutral. Because everyone will be making so much more, even though we're taxing the wealthiest at a much lower rate, revenues won't suffer. Now here's the reality. Well, Reagan cut taxes at the highest marginal rate from 90% in 1980 when he took office to 38%. 38. George W. Bush then cut the highest marginal rate for wealthy people, 35% in 2001. So that's judging the economy from 1980 to 2007, that's 30 years basically of experience with the economy. With lower tax rates for the wealthy, what happened? National GDP growth declined on average by a full percentage point per year. 3.8 to 2.8 per year in real terms. So the economy did not, in fact, grow faster. It, in fact, as a national economy, grew slower. That's number one. Number two, revenues fell off their prior growth rate. And in fact, even after Clinton increased taxes and the second term of Ronald Reagan, and he increased taxes, George Bush's dad increased taxes, despite those tax increases, revenue growth at the federal level never got back to the trajectory it was on before these tax cuts were implemented in 1980. So while there have been little blips back up over time, revenue growth is significantly below where it would have been if we hadn't tinkered with the system. That is the truth. Number three, the benefits of the economy sure did not trickle down to everyone. In fact, share in income growth over time flipped. So that from the end of World War II to the 1970 sequence, where you had the bottom 90% getting 66% of all income growth, from 1980 to 2007, and remember, I am leaving out the Great Recession, because then it gets much worse. But even leaving that out, during that period, the bottom 90% only got 34% of all income growth, whereas the top 10% got 66%. So everything that's supposed to have happened when we went to this change in tax policy, in fact, did not happen. That is the data. And a real good reason for that is it's contrary to fundamental tax policy. It is contrary to sound fundamental principles of economics and fiscal policy. And frankly, it is proven in the data not to work. So I don't get why this theory can even be discussed rationally anymore, because it simply has failed to produce as its proponents claimed it would. Meanwhile, you look at our federal deficit today of what is it, 1.3 trillion, 1.4 trillion dollars. 40% of that deficit are the Bush tax cuts and the interest on the debt to finance those tax cuts. That's 40% of that deficit. At some juncture, you have to take a rational approach to this that is based on sound fundamental principles, not values.
The nice speech. Number one, my view is that these are things is up for you to decide. You cannot turn around and say this is not a function of values. It's a foregone conclusion. The fact of the matter is these are policies that are open to debate. I think what Ralph has done is very effectively illustrate how a system begins at one point in time and then works to break down. He used the idea that progressive taxation is beyond debate. First of all, that's not true. It's clearly inside the debate, and sometimes one side wins that debate, and other times the other side wins that debate, and it becomes less progressive or more progressive. High progressive taxation of incomes produces a very, very unstable tax system, which Ralph himself said is part of one of the four things that should be out there. The instability of America's tax system is not just a function of its progressivity or its rates. It is a function of a great many things. Lobbies, that come in and say, don't tax this, give me a break, but don't give them a break. Then we have, so everybody wants a very high level of taxation, but then they have literally thousands of complexities that come in there, so that one company that produces X has to pay a lot of taxes, but another company that gets to produce, like GE, they go and engage in their crony capitalism, and they get to produce windmills and supposed green jobs and supposed other things, and then they get a tax break where they have all this money and they pay no taxes at all. That's a function of a system that's breaking down. Rather than debate Ralph point by point, because again, I don't want to sit there and say this is fair, that's not my decision. And I don't think it's fair for Ralph to just sit there and say that it's beyond debate when it clearly isn't.
I say it's beyond debate from an economic principle and fiscal policy standpoint.
And
Clearly people could debate
Wait,
clearly if they want, but
okay.
it's not going to put words in my mouth, which you just did.
No, I didn't put words in your mouth, I'm just repeating what you said. Now, we were asked, and I don't know if we're going to get to this question, but how can we fix the tax system, and what would be my recommendations?
Oh, that's the next question.
That's the next question. Well, just very quickly, it is, what's been going on here is not just one side and everything up to 1979 was perfect and everything after 1980. What we've seen is a progressive breakdown of an increasingly unstable tax system that I think needs to be changed.